brought towards that plane of Krishna consciousness where nothing could be better, the days couldn't be better, your life couldn't be better. And at this particular festival, that experience was at its optimum. And of course there's the footage of Srila Prabhupada ringing that bell on the side of the deities and circumambulating with the devotees and raising his hand up for the devotees to jump. And when he would do that, it was such an ecstatic, emotional moment. And everyone seemed to become filled with that, what sometimes is described as indescribable joy of Krishna consciousness, just due to his association. So for everybody who came to the festival, it was a most wonderful experience. And then gradually the day of Gaur Purnima did arrive, and there was that initiation. One by one, Srila Prabhupada would call the devotees. When it finally came to the sannyasis, he would call them, and he would give them their danda, and he would announce where they would be preaching. So there were 7 of us, and everyone, one by one, when they received their beads or their thread or their danda, Srila Prabhupada had this exceptional smile on his face of satisfaction. And particularly when it came to the sannyasis, because the sannyasis are the symbol of the preaching endeavor of the Sankirtan movement. The dress, their lifestyle, everything symbolizes that endeavor to take Krishna consciousness throughout the world, to every town and village, although every man, woman, and child in the Krishna consciousness movement is engaged in that. The sannyasis are at the forefront, and they are the symbol of that endeavor. They are there on call 24 hours a day for that purpose. And Srila Prabhupada expected of them leadership in that role, particularly of preaching and spreading the Sankirtan movement. Some years earlier, he had expressed a desire that I would like an army. I want an army of sannyasis. So it was a couple years before I heard that, and I thought, oh, I would like to join that army. So that was 7 new sannyasis on that day. That was a big step forward in building that preaching army. So he was very, very happy, very pleased about that.
There was some controversy at the time about the Radha Damodar party, and that culminated in Tamal Krishna Maharaj accepting an assignment to China. And he had asked that I accompany him, and Prabhupada had approved. So then that next morning, for the sannyas initiation, there was Guru Puja, and I got to lead it. And I was playing Madranga, and I was jumping up and down and leading everyone around, and circumambulation parikrama of the temple. And Prabhupada would stop and play the bell every time he got by the deities. So then later on that morning, Tamal said, I want to go up and talk to Prabhupada about China. So we went up, we went through his room to the back. He was sitting on the mat. Hari Shari was massaging with oil. And Prabhupada looked up. Tamal said, Srila Prabhupada. And Srila Prabhupada looked past him at me and said, if you lead kirtan like that, the whole world will follow.
I was seated with Lakshminath Prabhu, and we were seated on a bench on the balcony just beside the stairs on the Lotus building on the first floor. And we were chanting our japa. It was during the japa period in the morning. And I imagine that the person who was in charge of cleaning Srila Prabhupada's room was unavailable for some reason. So a devotee came running down the stairs, and there was another devotee sitting at the other end of the bench. So this Prabhu came down and asked him first, Prabhu, we need somebody to clean Srila Prabhupada's room. Could you come up and clean his room? And the devotee answered, I have to finish my rounds. And Lakshminath and I couldn't believe what we had just heard. Because in those days, there wasn't much to do in Mayapur besides chant rounds. So he had all day. And so we just looked at each other. We were like, we'll do it. So we jumped up. We ran up the stairs, and we helped this devotee. We got to make Srila Prabhupada's bed that he had slept in that night. We swept his room, and we were able to get a nice big dustpan full of dust from the lotus feet of Srila Prabhupada, and not missing an opportunity, we hung our heads over the balcony and we poured the dust over both of our heads and really massaged it in. And we felt ourselves to be the most fortunate people on the planet.
Everybody was talking about this one devotee named Anantaram Shastri. He was a Vaishnav. He was a great Sanskrit scholar. The title Shastri is a title that's given to people who've received some degrees in Sanskrit learning. And he could literally read Sanskrit just like we read English. And he could speak Sanskrit and everything. So when Prabhupada heard about him, he brought him to his room and he was preaching to him. And at one point, Prabhupada wanted him to come and assist him to translate some of the Sanskrit purports of the Acharyas. Not that Prabhupada needed help, but he was trying to engage him. So every night, Prabhupada told his devotee they would go around the Mayapur temple with cow dung and some incense and conch shell. And they would chant the Purusha Sukta and take this cow dung and incense to chase the mosquitoes with this devotee chanting Sanskrit. And Prabhupada was very happy with that. They would go to all the floors. And also every morning, this devotee, before the Bhagavatam class, would chant certain Sanskrit hymns. He had composed a Bhaktivedanta Stotram, or a hymns of praise to Prabhupada. It was very melodious and very sweet. And Prabhupada wanted the devotees to learn a few verses from that. Prabhupada says these verses should be taught to the Gurukul children and to the devotees. There was one prayer, Krishna Kacheta Madamoha Vinashakarin. There's like 4 or 5 prayers. The entire Stotram was like 23 verses, but there was 6 specific prayers that Prabhupada wanted devotees to learn. Because what happened is several months later, when I went to Vrindavan, we taught some of these Sanskrit prayers to the Gurukul children, and we chanted in front of Prabhupada. And Prabhupada was just very happy with that. But those particular prayers were a major contribution that Prabhupada greatly appreciated and wanted that introduced. And some devotees still chant those.
I spent a month as Prabhupada's servant prior to the 76 Mayapur festival. I had been studying Sanskrit, so I knew quite a few verses. And one of my favorite verses, if not my favorite verse, is Kechit Kilaya Bhaktya Vasudeva Parayana. Aghang Dhundwanti Karsena Niharam Iva Bhaskara, which means that for the unalloyed devotee, Krishna dispels the sins, just like the sun dispels the fog. So we were walking on the roof of Mayapur, and in the morning in Mayapur, for anybody who's visited Mayapur, they've probably seen the fog that hangs over all the rice paddies. Bengal is just this wonderfully lush country, and in Mayapur is this flat country where you can see for miles. But sometimes there's this fog that lingers over the top of the rice paddies. And sometimes it can be just incredibly beautiful, and the sun is coming up, so you can see the action of the sun clearing the fog, and it's just incredible, the whole scenery. So one time Prabhupada was walking on his morning walk, and he stopped and he paused and looked out over this panorama and indicated with his sweep of his hand the sun, and then he said, Kechit Kivalaya Bhaktya Vasudeva Parayana, the first line from this verse, indicating that Krishna is like the sun who dispels the fog of our sins. It's just incredible, wonderful experience.
Vishnu John had asked Prabhupada on a morning walk on the roof of the building, how was Chotahari Das delivered by committing suicide after his offense? So Vishnu John had been thinking about that question probably for days. He said, Srila Prabhupada, can I ask a question? And his voice cracked while he said it. And I looked up because his voice was so emotional. And Prabhupada looked at him and he said, yes. And then he asked him that question. And then Prabhupada said something to the effect that, yes, if a sannyasi does that, if he has illicit sex, then it is better that he kill himself. Then while he was talking, Vishnu John looked away. He looked off to the side. And then Prabhupada said, but that is an exemplary punishment. It is not meant to be taken literally. And he stopped and walked on. And Vishnu John never heard the last part of the answer. Something happened, and he was feeling very guilty and bad about it. I marked, that's why he's been different since I saw him on the way from New York. He was pale, and he was staring off into space, and he looked completely distant and detached from his surroundings. And I had never seen him like that in years. He was always energetic, enthusiastic, had a lot of effulgence, and he was busy. I grew up with him. We played in Grandma's backyard from the time we were a year old together. He and I had a significant thing. You know, we lived in the same house in the Haight-Ashbury. He joined 6 months before I did. If it hadn't been for him, I probably never would have become a devotee. The last thing Vishnu John said to me was, whatever you do, try to do something beautiful for Prabhupada. I told him I do. Anyway, I don't see Vishnu John again until the walk. After he asked that question, I marked, he's thinking about suicide. You have to talk to him. He didn't hear the end of the answer. So I'm thinking, as soon as I get a chance, I'm going to talk to him. By the time the crowd dispersed, we got down to the morning program, which was right afterward. I didn't see Vishnu John at the program. He disappeared. I never set eyes on him again. I never got a chance to talk to him.
Most of the visiting women were asked to help in the kitchen cutting vegetables for the daily cooking. So I would go down and cut vegetables, but at a certain time I knew was the time when Srila Prabhupada was coming back from his morning walk. So I would desert my post and run down to the main gate and see Srila Prabhupada coming with a small group of devotees across the fields. And the morning sun in Mayapur is very warm, and it has kind of a golden radiant look, and this beautiful morning sun would shine on Srila Prabhupada's face, and he just looked especially beautiful in the morning sun.
I made my way to the veranda outside of his quarters, and there I saw a long line of devotees, and I was told they were all waiting to get into darshan. But I sat down anyway and waited. And then someone from inside the darshan room came out and said, "There's room for one more person to go in." And I immediately stood up and said, Me, I want to see Srila Prabhupada. So he said, "Okay, you." And all of those devotees who had been waiting longer than me, I walked past them and in to see Srila Prabhupada. I had these bananas. I felt so lucky. So I walked in the door, and there was Prabhupada sitting behind his little desk. And I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if proper etiquette was to offer my obeisances first and then give him the bananas, or to give him the bananas and then offer my obeisances. I was very confused. I looked at Srila Prabhupada, and he smiled at me. And I felt, oh, he knows me. I knew that he could see that I was very confused and didn't know what to do, and the smile was not only of welcome, but it was some amusement also to see me in such a state. But I felt like he was looking at me and no one else but me, and he was welcoming me as his daughter, and he was so happy to see me that it had been a long, long time, and we were finally seeing each other again. That's how I felt, that it was a great distance, a great time had elapsed, and we were once again united. I don't remember if I offered my obeisances or gave the bananas first. The next thing I remember is I was making my way to the back of the room where I sat and listened to him speak. Truly, I don't remember anything that was said in that darshan, but I was happy just to be there in his presence and to hear him speaking.
It was just so beautiful in Mayapur, the wheat fields and the rice fields and the banana trees and the birds flying. And one day I went with a small group of people down to the Ganges. We went out into the water and sat down, bathed in the Ganges. And I had another moment of that, just pure clarity that I had the first time I saw Srila Prabhupada. Just total peace, total clarity. I mean, you could see that the Ganges had silt in it and stuff like debris floating by. But that was only the outer, the visible things. There was a sensation or an experience of transcendence. It was wonderful.
At the Mayapur festival, Prabhupada had called in the leaders to his room, and he requested that they would pray for me and give their blessings, that I was pioneering and taking great risk in the communist countries, shipping his books to people who he never thought would actually take them. And he was so happy that not only were they scholars, but they were behind the Iron Curtain, and they were so favorable. And knowing that we were risking maybe our lives or could be put in jail, that Prabhupada asked the leaders that they give their blessings, that they make special prayers to Ganesham. So one or two of the leaders mentioned that Prabhupada, all that's needed is your prayers. You're Krishna's special servant. But Prabhupada distinctly said, no, you give your prayers and you give blessings, because Krishna, he will respond to the prayers of the devotees. And this was an example of Prabhupada's humility, and is also, I think, is an example of him encouraging us that we need to be always thinking about the welfare of each other, work as a team, and trying to offer our service to him and to Krishna.
I remember we were walking one time and Prabhupada said, you build the buildings and people will come and stay here, you'll get plenty of guests. But some people expressed, how are they going to come? It's such a remote place. And Prabhupada said, no, people will come here, you'll see. So many people will come, and now Mayapur is packed with tens of thousands of people every day. 25, 30,000 people on the weekends in the winter. Big festive days, over 100,000. Initially, there was nobody. It was very quiet in the early 70s. And now it's become very active, just as Prabhupada predicted. He had the vision. I remember one time I was walking with so many GBCs, he turned to one and the other, and he'd tell them how he's depending on one or the other to build a big temple in Mayapur. He was trying to inspire them to fulfill his mission. After telling them that they should do it, how he's depending on them, then he also told that he was depending on me. So we knew it was a team effort. It was going to require many devotees' cooperation to pull it off. Building a spiritual city here, and temple of Vedic planetarium, which will propagate the message of Lord Chaitanya all over the world, fulfilling the desire of the previous Acharyas.
The Lilamrita Grounds Festival. It was an interesting event that after one of the programs, Srila Prabhupada came into the back, and this was a normal thing after the program. Prabhupada would go into the room and sit down, have a glass of water, sometimes talk with us. So I was alone with Srila Prabhupada, and he turned to me and asked, what did you think of the kirtan? And I said, I thought it was okay. Prabhupada said, no. It was clanging and banging. Kirtan should be sweet and melodious. She says, come, let us go to the ashram and have kirtan. So myself, Srila Prabhupada, Bharadraj, and Prabhupada's servant, the four of us went in a car to the ashram. We went to Prabhupada's room. Bharadraj got a harmonium. We sat down. Bharadraj played the harmonium and led, and I believe Prabhupada also sang. He probably exceeded 1 hour. And then Prabhupada nodded that the kirtan could stop and turned to me and said, so sweet and melodious.
On March the 30th, we traveled down to Aligarh. Aligarh is a city of about 300,000. It's mainly Muslim, but we had a life member there. His name was Surendra Kumar Saigal. He had a big house there, like an estate, and he was the owner of the Tiger Lock Company. Prabhupada stayed at Surendra Kumar Saigal's house. He was a nice man, and his wife actually was a worshipper of Krishna. When we went to the house, she took us in to a small deity room that they had, and they had a very nice deity of Krishna. She used to do some simple puja every day. Prabhupada liked it and encouraged her, but he told her that she should buy a deity of Radharani. He told her, why keep Krishna alone? So they had arranged a program in a big open area in Aligarh. I think it was called the Press Colony Grounds. Then in the evening, we drove out to the Press Colony Grounds. And the devotees had already been there for about a half hour or so. And because it was during the festival period, of course, there were a lot of devotees. And they were doing a very, very lively kirtan. You can see from these pictures that they were very enthusiastic, jumping and dancing. And when Srila Prabhupada came, of course, they became very exuberant, because a lot of the devotees, of course, only saw Prabhupada once a year. And for many of them, to have the experience of doing a Pandal program in India with a huge crowd, there was probably about 7,000 people that turned out for it. It was a very wonderful experience for them. So they were naturally very enthusiastic in their chanting and dancing. And when Prabhupada came, he also seemed to become very enthused by the presence of the devotees and the size of the crowd. So you can see he's on the Vyasa there, he's very happy, playing his kartals, he's chanting along with the devotees. And the lecture that Prabhupada gave was all about chanting the holy name. He quoted this verse that if you just chant the holy name of Krishna even once, it will destroy more sins than you can commit in a whole lifetime. So he was really encouraging the crowd. You know, these are my disciples. You can see how they've been transformed by the chanting of the Hare Krishna mantra. So you all take up this chanting as well. But the program, interestingly enough, had been organized by a friend of Mr. Saigal's, who was the head of the Ram Tirtha mission. Ram Tirtha is a well-known Mayavadi. And this man got swept up with the excitement of having all these Western devotees coming. So he had arranged for all the pandal. There's this very wonderful silver Vyasa that Prabhupada's sitting on there. And it was a very nice arrangement. Big area, nice stage and everything. And after we'd had the pandal, then of course we stayed at Saigal's house. And then the next day in the morning, we went from Aligarh to Vrindavan. So before Prabhupada left Aligarh, this man from the Ram Tirtha mission came, and he presented Srila Prabhupada with a set of 3 books, compilations of some lectures that had been given by Ram Tirtha Swami. So Prabhupada was very cordial. He thanked the man, but he didn't pay any attention to the books at all. He didn't even touch them. And then the man, he had a couple of minutes, and then he went off. So then Prabhupada got up and he walked out. He didn't take the books with him. He didn't even look at them. So I had a squint inside one of the books. And when I opened it up, I looked in one of the lectures, a lecture he delivered to some Westerners. So it started off with the words, myself in the form of ladies and gentlemen. All Mayavadi, all the way through. Prabhupada just shook his head. And then we left. So then we went off to Vrindavan.
After entering the room for initiation into the Gayatri Mantra, I offered my respects to Srila Prabhupada, and when I got up, I cried out, Jai Srila Prabhupada. at which Srila Prabhupada responded, Jai Srila Prabhupada. And at first I was a little taken aback, but in a split second I realized that this was Srila Prabhupada offering respect to his spiritual master. And this was a lesson to me that a spiritual master never accepts gifts or praise or any kind of respect on his own behalf, but always on behalf of his spiritual master, and then the spiritual master in turn passes this on to his. And in this way things are offered ultimately to Krishna himself.
Prabhupada used to come down to the temple in the evenings, late afternoon,